Hey there, it's Robin, and you're listening to Healthy Habits for a Healthier Home. I'm here to help you create a healthier life, one simple shift at a time. If you're a mama ready to ditch toxins, clean up your family's nutrition, and build daily habits that support your well-being, you're definitely in the right place. Each episode is packed not only with education, but practical tips and tools to help you transform your health and your home without that feeling of overwhelm. So let's take this journey together to create a thriving, low-tox home for you and your family. If you're ready, say, I am ready. Now let's get into this episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm super excited. Today we're going to be having a conversation with Dr. Hazen. She is a physician. She is a CEO of Microbiome and Ventura Clinical Trials. She's an expert in gut flora, which is why I wanted to have her on, because you guys know that I'm all into gut health, and I know what a difference that can make for people when we start to understand how that impacts. She's also an author, loved her book, Let's Talk Shit, which was really funny, but really interesting. I recommend that to anybody. So welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. I can't wait to dive into this meaty conversation because I feel like the microbiome is just sort of coming out of its infancy stage. And you have a lot of knowledge in it. And I've been following you for a while. And so if you want to just give everybody like a little background about how you actually got into this work, because that's not really where you started.
Yeah, so I'm a gastroenterologist by trade, and I basically started doing clinical trials for pharma about 3 decades ago in my first year of fellowship. And then clinical trials brought me into this world of feces and capsules. I was the girl that was doing clinical trials for a bacteria called C. diff, a bacteria that was caused by taking antibiotics. And when I started doing a procedure called fecal transplant, taking stools from a healthy donor, putting it in a patient with C. diff, other things started happening. I started noticing other conditions improving, which basically asked the question, what is in stools? What is in the microbiome, right? What we call the microbiome, to make it beautiful, is really, and I called it Let's Talk Shit, because I want people to know. When we talk microbiome, we're talking about your poop in the toilet, right? So when fecal transplant became a capsule for pharma, and a product, I had all these questions, which was fine because obviously we need a product to help patients with C. diff that are dying. But when you start thinking about feces for autism, for Parkinson's, for Alzheimer's, etc., what is in the microbiome of that? And so I went on this path away from my training, basically, to understand the microbiome.
And I love that. And I think your curiosity is so awesome, because I feel like as we grow into an adult age, we lose a lot of that curiosity. And I know, like what you were doing, you could have just stayed in your lane and not been curious and not asked the questions, and you wouldn't be discovering what you're discovering. And my first dive into gut health was with my girls, and they had a stool sample done. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, what is this?
That's what happened to me, right? I was like you, I wanted to understand my 2 girls. So I decided to use a test, which at the time was Ubiome, and saw that. So my mind of a scientist and a doctor, I sent 2 exact sample to the lab, the same exact sample of me to the lab, and I got 2 different results.
Interesting.
Already, I started thinking, wait a minute, who's validating this? How are we validating? And then how is there a normal? Because that was the thing. There was this report that you got, and it said, you're here, and the normal is there. And I called the company. I remember calling the company and the rep, and I said, who are your normals? And he said, well, the owners of the company. And I said, the owners of the company are the standard of health now? Who made them the standard of health? How do you characterize normal? And is normal, is it okay to compare a fat person to a skinny person? Is it okay to compare a vegan person to a vegetarian to a carnivore? No. So when you're saying normal, are you comparing me to a carnivore or are you comparing me to a vegan or a vegetarian? Who are you comparing me exactly to? And so those were the red flags with that whole industry back then of the stool testing that everybody was jumping on. And especially in autism, all these parents were jumping and they're like, oh my God, my kid has a dysbiosis. Here's the stool test. But here's the thing, nobody really understood what microbes are implicated in autism. Like we knew, if you read Dr. Sidney Feingold's book and you see he said the sulfur but the man cultured microbes in kids with autism and said, I found that the sulfur grew in that kid with autism, or I found Clostridium perfringens grew. So when you have that technology to do cultures, and then you take that culture all the way to genetic sequencing, which is what I do, and basically you start seeing something. You start seeing a signal for autism, a signal for Parkinson's. When you start opening that can of worm in a way, you start realizing that what you did or what I did in my comfort zone of doing clinical trials for pharma is really was not necessarily the right way, right? You start understanding that maybe it's not about killing microbes, maybe it's about growing microbes, right? Maybe it's not about looking for microbes that are elevated but looking for microbes that are lost. And so yes, there is some truth to your kids and seeing, and all disease begins in the gut. So no matter what condition your kid has, whether it's a depression or whether it's irritable bowel syndrome, yes, you got to look at the gut. But then what do you do with that finding of the gut microbiome? And is that finding accurate enough to say, yes, I know what's wrong with my kid. I'm going to do this for my kid. You have no idea how many people come to me and say, Dr. Hazen, I have this bacteria. How do I kill it? And the answer is not killing the bacteria. The answer is, how do we restore what you've lost? How do we restore the bifidobacteria? And so that's really the path. So it became a path of discovery in a way, mainly because I wanted to know, what if I'm the person at 90 that develops Alzheimer's and I want to live another 10 years, right? What if I'm the person, that has, I don't know, that gets bit by a tick, and how do I fix that problem? I didn't want to be the girl that said I could have figured out the microbiome when I did, and I didn't. I waited till I had disease to go back. So I jumped in it mainly because I saw there was a corruption. The stool testing, think about Ubiome that got indicted for fraudulent stool test. They were comparing.
And I want to stop for 1 second just because, so if you're listening to this and you're thinking along the lines of ever doing a stool test, it's just like anything else. You have to use a reputable company and a reputable source. And that takes some digging. It does take some conversation, maybe with your pediatrician or with your doctor. But I would even go a step further to doing your own research after someone recommends a company to you, doing a little bit of digging to see, because obviously Ubiome wasn't doing the right things.
And even the government didn't know that they weren't doing the right thing, right? It's only when they started looking into it and started looking into validation and that they realized. And also, listen, I was talking to a scientist the other day who was using them to do the data and to look at the data. And basically, he said to me, he went to visit the lab and he saw all those samples were wide open. Nobody was checking them in or checking anything on it. So, I think that, that was a bit of a Ponzi scheme that kind of like took off. But it at least got people started thinking about, microbiome. And here's the thing, right now, they're just doing a general therapy, right? So I think it's important to let your audience know that this is the beginning of research. It's an exciting beginning, but it's still a beginning of research. So what do we know about the microbiome? Well, what we know about the microbiome is that it's important. We certainly discovered that during COVID. Our lab was the lab that discovered COVID in the stools, and by whole genome sequencing, and we actually published on it. From there, um, our lab was basically the one that found a lost microbes, loss of bifidobacteria, and that loss of bifidobacteria appeared in severe COVID patients. From there, we also discovered vitamin C increases the bifidobacteria, vitamin D increases bifidobacteria, ivermectin short term. So those are the things we really know. Now, from here, we need more data. We need more research. We need to know, does ivermectin increase the bifidobacteria long term? Is that the reason patients with cancer are benefiting from ivermectin? We need to know what products are doing what to the microbiome. Does doxycycline improve the bifidobacteria in the microbiome, or does it kill it? Does hydroxychloroquine improve or kill it? Does chemo drugs, does it kill a tumor and therefore possibly kills a microbe that's elevated with that tumor? Certainly, we've seen H. pylori with gastric cancer, EBV with Burkitt's lymphoma, HPV with cervical cancer. So is there a microbe that's elevated that the chemo's killing and at the same time killing the microbiome? And therefore, how do we bring up the optimization of the microbiome and kill that microbe that's the culprit of, the tumor, for example? So I think this is still a beginning. This is a beginning also that says, we need to start looking at what all these foods are doing. Like we're doing a study right now on Manuka honey and the microbiome, because I'd like to know, is it
Yeah.
improving? Is it killing? We're doing a study on lactoferrin and the microbiome. We're doing a study on certain probiotics. Why is it that some probiotics actually reach the colon and do what they're supposed to do and others are not? What is it in the probiotic that is helpful and what is it that is not helpful? Because these probiotics are made in a big vacuum. Is there a contamination of the probiotic that makes it that it doesn't work on your gut? So I think all these questions, what is the microbiome of a person with Parkinson's? What is the microbiome of a person with Alzheimer's? Especially as we're going into a field of manipulating the microbiome to restore the gut to get these people with Parkinson's better. Ultimately, it's an exciting field, but it's also a needle in a haystack, and you have to find that needle, and it's not easy.
Yeah, and I think the only way to do that is to continue researching and to continue looking at people, like you said, and really looking at similarities and differences. And so, like within the microbiome, there's commensal bacteria and then there's not so friendly bacteria. But we, like you said, try to kill rather than boosting the good. And so you keep mentioning, bifidobacterium. And so I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because the layman person out in the world, right? They just, oh, my doctor says I need to get on a probiotic, a prebiotic, a postbiotic. And I always go to what can you do in the food section, like what foods have pre, pro, and post, and like let's dial in your nutrition too, because you can't just take a
Right,
pill to
right.
solve the
So
problem.
nutrition is definitely very important. One of the things I don't do in nutrition is green vegetables because I tend to find that they have a lot of microbes that I don't really like in a gut that's trying to grow bifidobacteria, for example. I started with bifidobacteria because it was the $1 trillion industry of probiotics. And that was the bacteria that was present in newborns and was absent in old people. So I zoned in on it. I also noticed it was absent in patients with invasive cancer. I also noticed it was absent in people with Alzheimer's, kids with autism, etc. So bifidobacteria became this important microbe mainly because from the pandemic, I noticed that, look, if a bifidobacteria of a patient was there, the patient was fine, didn't have COVID. And I have a huge population that were not vaccinated, never got COVID. And the key feature is really this heightened bifidobacteria. But of course, it's not the only microbe. There are other resilient microbes out there. But to me, bifidobacteria is like starting the alphabet with the letter A. And so why not start with that bacteria? Mainly because it starts your health as a child and a newborn. One of the things that we noticed in trying to up this bifidobacteria and shift the microbiome was really how it interacts with other microbes, how it's one microbe talks to another, talks to another. And it's really, and then there's a balance, there's a shift in the balance that occurs within the gut of the human that creates its own, challenges. So for example, improving one part of the person, but then aggravating another part. I've changed the balance of the microbiome. So now the person is better immunity, but then, mental status is not as clear, right? So it is interesting that when you manipulate the microbiome, you manipulate that balance, you manipulate this communication between microbes, which allows for the person to be healthy, non-healthy, clear mental status, not clear mental status. But I think one of the key features, and I think one of the things we've done wrong in medicine, is we keep looking at the microbes that are elevated, that are pathogenic, toxic bacteria like C. diff, and we forget to look at the other side of the coin, which is the missing microbes that were supporting that microbe, that was suppressing that microbe that it was secreting a toxin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said that with, I did a podcast earlier on today with Jack Cruz, which was very interesting, by the way, to talk to the man because he sees a different vision than I do. He's in the light and I'm in the darkness or poop. Although we came to say today that, the darkness has light because microbes probably create light. But here's the thing, when you're looking at the stools and you're looking at absence of one microbe that possibly could be doing something like helping you decompose sugar, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not decomposing sugar, you're not absorbing sugar. If you're not absorbing sugar, your mitochondria is not working. So I don't care if you've got all the mitochondria that you need. If they're not functioning, if they're not moving, if they're not getting nutrients in there, they're not going to work. And therefore, your cell's not going to work. So that's how you have to start thinking about it. So bifidobacteria became important. But as we started looking at bifidobacteria, we noticed other microbes were equally important. It's really a microbe that's in check and in balance.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And achieving that balance, by the way, is complex because it's not just a pill, it's not just an injection. It's really your whole being. It's your whole being in that environment. It's your whole being in that stress level. It's your whole being Zen or non-Zen.
We always talk about primary foods being everything off your plate that feeds you, because it's not just the food on your plate. There's so much that goes into a human. And in order to be a healthy human, all parts kind of have to be in check and in balance for you to be your best self. So with the fecal transplant, because that's all new to me, how did you dip into that to figure out that that was going to help somebody with C. diff? And could that be a possibility for other people that have other diseases like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or
Looked at, there's a lot of clinical trials looking specifically at Parkinson's, looking autism. There's a lot of clinical trials out there on fecal transplant because you can imagine, I mean, if feces could be used for C. diff, they could probably be used for autism. There's a lot of data from Dr. Adams on the fecal pill that's coming out, and Alex Karutz in his lab is talking about the fecal pill for autism. So that data is going to be coming out. That's promising. The problem again is we're trying to fix a problem that is not fixed with conventional therapy. So we're going into the microbiome space. But I would hope that at some point we transition from feces to more precise microbes. So in other words, well, you've got this bacteria that's missing and you've got this bacteria that's overgrown. Why don't we kill the bacteria that's overgrown and then up the bacteria that's missing to try to restore the balance, right? I mean, the perfect future for me would be to go to the pharmacy of your future where you're getting a consortium of microbes to kill the bad and to restore, or even a product that can restore the gut microbiome. The fascinating thing that we discovered with our biome boosters, that I like to call it, the bovine immunoglobulins on biome boosters, was that it's the blood of the cow that's spun around that we test. And basically what we notice is that it increases the bifidobacteria, decreases the Bacteroides, increases the Bacillata, or the microbes that help with calcium absorption and vitamin B absorption, and it decreases the proteobacteria, but it also increases the diversity. Now, for the person that has that formula of microbes, where they're low BIF, high Bacteroides, low Bacillata, high proteobacteria, low diversity, the bovine immuno, and they're not constipated, they're more on the diarrhea side, irritable bowel, Crohn's disease. That product is perfect. We actually published on that. Okay. So that product is perfect for those people on a small publication that we've done because it binds the proteobacteria, which are elevated in those folks, and it increases the bifidobacteria at the same time. So here's a product that basically was thought of for Crohn's disease initially as a nutritional support, and then could never really go into patent. And so we basically acquired it to test it, and then realized, wait a minute, it's got tremendous potential for the people that have that formula of loss of BIF, high Bacteroides. So now people come to me with all sorts of problems, and then you see the microbiome and you see there's a formula, right? It's important to match the formula with the product. I think that's going to be the way of the future. In other words, you have ABC. ABC is going to match with this product. Right now, I'm doing it with my brain that stumbles on these things. Eventually, it's probably going to be AI. But here's the problem with AI. AI needs to be legit, and AI needs to be, in the hands of someone that will protect and preserve the finding. Because here's the thing. In a world where we are finding out that there's a signature microbiome for Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, in the wrong hands, that could be a destruction of humanity. And unfortunately, that's what we've created because mankind tends to be greedy and wants to make business out of everything. And so, unfortunately, we've created only the focus of a business, and we've lost the focus on protecting and safeguarding humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And in the business model, we have globalized, we have branded our American ways of, pushing these food substances, these drug substances. In doing so, we've created a great model of marketing and sales and business. But in doing so, we've killed humanity. And we're killing humanity when you see 1 in 27 kids in California that have autism, or 1 in 33 in New Jersey. So the children is what's telling us humanity is going extinct. We're going to have a problem with chronic disease. I mean, you could see, diabetes type 1 is through the roof. In kids, obesity in kids is through the roof. I mean, what have we done to our children? They're on these little devices constantly. They're not outside. They're not exposed to microbes. We clean the heck out of them. We vaccinate, like we give them 100 vaccines to protect them from the environment when they should be in the environment, exposed, building up their own natural immunity. We should be feeding them good food, not foods that have colorings and things like that, or glyphosates. Think about the concept of vitamins. We wouldn't need to give a vitamin if the orange was pure,
Right.
if the orange didn't have pesticides on it. We've done so much in building that business aspect of healthcare that we've destroyed health. And in destroying health, unfortunately, we are destroying humanity. Think about, the reproduction. Look at
Mhm.
Italy. They're having problems with reproduction. They're having problems having people take care of the old. So when you see a young population that is going into chronic disease, how can they possibly help you when you get old, right? So if we
Mhm.
don't stop and look at the kids and make sure that our kids are healthy, have a good mental status. Kids today, the pandemic has killed our kids from isolating them to they can't see grandma because they're going to contaminate grandma. We made them fearful of being these
Mhm.
microbial reservoirs, but they are microbial reservoirs to
Right.
help grandma. So what are we doing? We're separating the kids from the grandparents. We're creating, a dysbiosis within society, which affects humanity. The lack of reproduction, the increased rate of dysbiosis and mental health in our kids, and autism in our kids is really the wake up call that humanity needs right now to say, wait a minute, we need to slow down. We're selling crap. Why are we selling crap when we need to understand it first
Right.
before selling it? Now, I get it. You have Alzheimer's, you have Parkinson's, you have autism. Yes, take stools. It's your informed consent. But let's do better than stools. Let's understand it so we can precisely treat. Precision medicine is what I want. I,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if we could get there, that is where it's going to be at. It's going to take some time, but
because it
yeah,
needs to happen.
exactly. And I think the precision, what that's going to do is it's going to individualize everything into
Yes.
care for yourself. And because everybody, even within a family dynamic, has different things. And genetics plays a part, environment plays a part. And if you are secluded from your family or if you're in a family unit, all of that matters. And right now, if what we have is can give one baby step forward from somebody for someone who has a family member who's suffering, let's take that baby step. But behind the scenes, people like you who get it, who understand, need to be leading the way to create that precision medicine. And I hope and pray that your voice is starting to be heard now and not
Well,
suppressed.
it's still a battle and it's still traps along the battlefield. I mean,
Yeah,
it's roadblocks after roadblocks, and it's gonna be those roadblocks because unfortunately we live in a world that is corrupt. The dollar sign, the price of the stock matters more than the price of a life. And you know what? It's all great until you're the patient and
that's
then
right.
your life matters and you spend the money on the stock when you should have been focusing on how do I improve my life? Because at the end of the day, let me tell you, there are billionaires that I take care of in Malibu and that I took care of in Malibu who had kidney cancer. And basically, a guy in particular had kidney cancer, was a billionaire living on the beach. He would have done anything, he would have paid anything to see 2 more years of his kids growing up. When we stop science, when we interfere with science, when we censor science, when we block a research, when we retract the paper. This has been my experience in the pandemic, by the way. And
I know
because
I read that you got censored and all of that, which
I got censored, I got my papers retracted. Imagine a paper that we found COVID in the stools, the first paper that showed whole genome sequencing of COVID in the stools. There was nothing wrong with that paper. It was an observational paper. We analyzed the stools. We found COVID. We had two controls in there. We saw positive PCR, positive NGS in 100% of the patients, not even in one or two. Science is about to prove me wrong. Why are
right.
you thinking of retracting that paper? Here's what happens. You're retracting that paper. Now you're saying, well, COVID never existed. Because
Mhm.
what proof do we have that COVID existed? You just retracted a paper. Also, you're basically saying COVID is not in the stools when we know it was in the stools. When we tested it, I had a patient that had Tourette's, had COVID in her stools for 1 year. We
Wow.
found she had COVID. We treated Tourette's. Tourette's is gone, right?
Wow.
So what do you do when you're stopping that paper? You're saying, well, it's not in the stools, don't even look at it. And now there's other papers that are saying, yes, it was in the stools. I've been validated over and over and over again. Why are you retracting a paper of 2021? That was the
Because
first.
they don't want that information to get out.
They don't want that information, but also they don't want me on stage because I challenge the narrative.
Yeah.
I challenge the beehive of pharma. But guess what? Having been in pharma for 3 decades and bringing these drugs to market, I have a right to challenge because drug after drug, we have not fixed anything.
Right.
Drug after drug, we have not solved the cholesterol mystery. Drug after drug, we have not cured Crohn's. Instead, we're putting patients with, on medications at $10,000 a month the rest of their lives. What is that poor little kid's gonna think of every day? He's like, oh my God, I'm so depressed. I have Crohn's. I have to see my GI doctor again for that injection. As much as it's great, it was great for the science of the time. We cannot just stay stagnant and say this is the best we have.
Absolutely.
No,
Yep.
we have
Absolutely.
to- because here's the thing, the guy who's behind the company is going to have a kid with Crohn's disease. And then he's going to have to put his kid on that medication for the rest of his life. And that kid's going to have mental health issues because he's going to be the patient. Wouldn't it be easier to kind of figure out the problem, solve the problem, get that kid?
Root cause. Yeah.
I
Find the
have
root
so
cause.
many kids that I've fixed, from Crohn's disease that are living a full life now. They're not thinking of Crohn's. And it was, one kid in particular was a kid who drank some raw milk actually from a goat that had infected mammary glands. It's an infection. He drank milk from a goat with infected mammary glands. He ends up seeing the GI doctor. The GI says you have Crohn's disease. Here's the biologic for the rest of your life. Well, we actually found the microbe that he got and the loss of microbes, and we focused on bringing back the microbiome and suppressing the microbe he got from that goat milk. And lo and behold, the kid is back to normal, healthy, nothing, no biologics, nothing, right? So this is what I want us to go into. I want us to go into better diagnostics, better precision medicine, better treatment, better therapy, better diets, better nutrition, so we can guide the world. So my job is not to challenge pharma. My job is to say, okay, well, you've done great with this now. Let's get you to be better at fixing the problem because that problem is going to continuously occur. You're always going to be exposed to microbes. You're
100%.
always going to be exposed to viruses. That's always going to, so there's always going to be a business, mainly because we are constantly evolving and these microbes are evolving with us. So it's not like pharma is going to just disappear. We need pharma, but we also need to make them better. And the
Yeah.
moment that price stock of pharma is all that matters is the moment we've lost humanity. And that's what it's all about right now.
Yeah.
Don't be fooled in thinking that scientists and doctors are running the show. No. Who's running the show are investors that are playing the stock market. This is an insider trading. Make no mistake. This is not about health. This is not about the pharma. It's even above pharma. Because people will say, well, those pharma evil. No, this is above. This is the person who is controlling the stock. The person who has an incentive in making money in the stock market. You remember the Fannie Mae with all the housing crisis? Well, the housing crisis now has become a pharma crisis at the stock market level. Okay. And I'm going to call it like it is because unfortunately, it's who monitors the stocks. There should be no interference and there should be no insider trading
Absolutely.
in the stock market. You buy the stock, you gamble, maybe that stock's going to do great. Great, we're all gambling, okay? It's fine. But the moment you start manipulating the data, the research, retracting papers to not advance another stock or to destroy a stock to enhance another one, we have a problem.
hmm
And
No,
that's one of
I agree with that 100%. And I think, again, we go back to that greed scenario. It's about money instead of people's health. And I think that narrative has to shift in order for us to begin healing. Otherwise, you know, the autism rate, in my mind, where I go is these are the kids that are supposed to take care of us when we're older. These are, and we are not prepared as a nation to help take care of these kids that are going to need, who already have full-time care when they're no longer have a parent. There's nothing set up for them. And I get so worried about families and the situation that they're in, and they're trying their best and they're overwhelmed and they're trying to find answers and they're just not. So I want to dive into autism just a little bit.
and the answers are expensive. Think about
Yes,
testing are expensive, treatment is expensive. Even if we go into the world of fecal transplant, finding the right donor is expensive. Testing the donor for VRE, CRE, ESBL, hepatitis, HIV, all these tests are expensive. This is not something insurance covers.
correct. Insurance
So,
doesn't cover anything.
no. So we're doing a disfavor. We're not
Yeah,
helping these parents. We're not helping the future. And unfortunately, it's increasing. So if we don't stop the
right.
problem, we're never going to advance. And
Correct.
again,
Well, hopefully we will get, some answers along the way and be able to start the shift. It's not going to happen overnight because what we're in right now didn't happen overnight. It's been years coming where people have been talking about it, but it's been hushed. And now at least it's a loud conversation, which I'm blessed and I feel thankful for, because without loud conversations and loud moms and loud people and loud doctors and scientists and people who have been silenced, like, you can use your voice now. And so, and even if there are roadblocks and there's those obstacles, I always say that challenges are opportunities for growth. So we'll just learn to push through those, because it's absolutely what has to happen in order to save our children and our children's children that are coming somewhere along the way.
100%. And you know what? Moms are all on this, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, forget it. It's
This has become a mama movement, I feel.
Yeah, because
Right?
moms are the ones that are taking care of these kids, and moms are the ones that are doing better than the pediatricians, doing better than the doctors. And yes, there are therapies,
In tune. That umbilical cord is still connected to our children.
100%.
So we're gonna look at our children and we're gonna be connected to them and we're gonna worry about them after we die. Like I
That's
worry
right.
about my kids. I worry about my kids after I'm dead. I
Yeah.
stepped into this because my fear was, what if my great grandchild develops autism, which
Yep.
the likelihood are very high at this point. I
Right.
mean, if you're 1 in 27 in California, and my kids are in California, you know, 50, 100 years from now, it's going to be 1 in 1. So the
Yeah.
likelihood are very high. And so I worry about my great grandchildren that I don't even have yet.
Oh,
And that's how we are as moms. We're mothers of humanity. We are mothers. We are connected with the planet. We are connected with our children. I think that's the beauty of being a mom, having had these babies in our bellies, is we feel that. We
hmm
raised them, we fed them when they were in our bellies. And I think we all stood up during COVID, in the majority of us, because we were saying, what do you mean? The vaccine is in the deltoid? What is that? It doesn't stay in the deltoid. What are you talking about? So we saw through the lies and we saw through the suffering of other moms. I stepped into this because I really feel moms of kids with autism are really warrior moms.
Absolutely.
They are awake all night. They
Yeah.
are watching these kids nonstop. Nobody helps them. I can tell you that much, You can't hire someone to take care of that kid. You have to do it yourself. That kid needs the mom, needs. So they are warrior moms. I mean, there's warrior dads too, and I've certainly
There is.
during the pandemic. I mean, I've certainly seen them in autism, but the mom is just it's
Moms just have an emotional difference than
yeah,
than the husband. It
maybe
just
bias as I'm a mom, so
I
I'm
guess, but I always think moms have just a different connection, and it's an
yes.
emotional one, where men, they are warriors. Anybody that has an autistic child in their family, whether they're high functioning or not, it doesn't mean that that I know there was like a whole big thing about, it ruins the family. It doesn't ruin the family. It changes the dynamic of the family for sure. And you have so much more to work through. My sister and brother-in-law have a child who's on the spectrum, and I see a day in and day out what they go through, and they're working hard and they are doing all the therapies and they're doing everything possible, and they're still looking for answers. They're still looking because he's different. He also has CP, so he's got some brain stuff, like everybody's unique. And so the, to learn about like the gut microbiome and how that could impact kids with autism, it has to be a conversation. Like it's not the end all be all, but it's part of the equation. And I think, again, when we look just specifically at one thing and this is the only thing, no, it's not the only thing. There's tons of things and variables that create change in a body, that creates sickness and creates different disease and things like that.
And I think also with that field, what happens is it gets divisive, right? They
Yeah,
want to divide it, so they stop you from they destroy your spirit from
try to.
looking for answers, because those answers may make them guilty. I remember when I started speaking on autism in social media, and
Hmm.
I got attacked. I mean, like attacked. And, by people that were saying, what are you talking about? These kids are extraordinary. And nobody said they weren't extraordinary. There's
Absolutely.
definitely different levels. And
Absolutely.
to ignore the fact that these kids are banging their head on the wall, breaking their teeth, and not able to speak. I
Hmm.
mean, those are the kids I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the kids that are like the future Mozarts of the world or Beethoven. I'm talking about the kids that want to express to you that they're suffering, that they have gas pain, that they can't articulate that their way of articulating that is to bang their head on the wall and break their teeth. I mean, that's my first case of autism, was that kid that basically came to my clinic, and I could feel he was in so much pain, but he couldn't communicate. And
Right.
he would literally bang his head on the wall, and his parents would say he's breaking his teeth and we have to fix that. After I did fecal transplant on that kid, the aggressivity was gone. He was able to sleep through the night. It allowed the
Wow.
parents to sleep through the night, which was the first thing that happened, because they were worried that he was gonna wake up in the middle of the night and we'll go walk, right? And now he's more manageable. So the family got to take a vacation together. They got to sleep. So the environment got better for the family as well. The sister who was living with her brother, that's also disruptive. And she was amazing at taking care of him, but at the same time,
It's a
it
lot.
didn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. If we can give some kind of relief to help these kids manage
So
better.
what are you finding in kids that have autism that come to your clinic when you are looking at their microbes? You're finding there's a lack of bifidobacteria?
Bacteria in a lot of them, that's the majority, and they have an overgrowth of a certain microbe, but it's not the same microbe for everyone.
Interesting. Okay.
Remember, Dr. Feingold basically did basically showed Clostridium perfringens and the Vibrio in these kids. We've seen that in a couple kids that had Clostridium perfringens. Some kids had the Vibrio, but we've also seen C. diff. We've also seen Lactobacillus animalis in one kid. We've also seen Bacteroides vulgaris, Bacteroides plebeius. There's different microbes that we've seen. And it's interesting because when you see the correction, when you see the microbes. So I have two kids right now that are twins. They were 6 years old last year, and they're identical twins, exact same microbes in both kids. In fact, we're going to showcase the three microbes that were elevated in those kids, identical. And then after we refloralized, I'm going to call it, or manipulated the microbiome, we noticed those microbes disappeared with the return of speech. So these kids were nonverbal and aggressive, and now 7 months later are fully verbal, reading every book, and able to communicate, able to read, and those microbes have disappeared, but also the microbes that were absent, like the bifidobacteria, in both kids was 0 and started growing. And as it grew, the speech restored. So
Interesting.
it's all about loss of microbes and growth of microbes. So I feel that that's going to be a huge breakthrough, because this is how we do fecal transplant. This is how do we change the microbiome in these kids, right? I
Yeah.
think it starts with a good assay to understand what microbes are overgrown and what microbes are lost. And it starts with a good donor, frankly, that
Hmm.
be used for those kids, and precisely for those kids, because what we've seen in the microbiome space in autism is everybody's different. Every kid
Hmm.
is different. And if one kid needs this formula of microbes, another kid may need another formula of microbes. So it's not that straightforward. It's a complex case. And these are of just the microbes we know of. There's a trillion other microbes. We have no idea what their names are. The future for Sabine Hazen is actually identifying in kids with autism new microbes, naming new microbes. So we can kind of better the field, give it better
Great.
markers to diagnose these kids early, to prevent autism. Even if you have a kid that's born with certain microbes, you may want to intercept that and get rid of that early and optimize the gut better. I think that's the field I'd like to see. It's a challenge that's getting stopped by, like I said, the venture capitalists that are basically that are focusing on the price of the stock and retracting the data and blocking the research from coming out there. I think there's going to need to be a decentralization that occurs in order for science to move ethically, righteously. The other problem and the biggest roadblock is really the brainwashing, the the sticking to the same foundation. To me, if something is not going the right direction, at some point you need to change direction.
You
You
got to
need
pivot.
to, when I look at the microbiome, one of the big things that I do is I really try not to be biased by anyone. So people try to infiltrate my brain with, well, you should try this and you should try that. And I always say, look, that's your hypothesis. Stay
Hmm.
away from my hypothesis.
Right.
I'm on a road, I'm on a path, and it seems to have worked so far. I mean, I'm still standing after COVID, so clearly it's working. Something is working. Um, I'm on a path. It's like that artist that that's seeing a beautiful portrait or a beautiful painting, and he sees it in his mind, and he's really painting it. He sees how it's going to be, and slowly, slowly, he's painting it. That artist cannot have someone over his shoulder say, I think you should use the black color or the orange color. No, you can't be distracted. As a scientist, we all have our hypotheses. Like I said, today I was talking to Jack Cruz, and basically he has a hypothesis with the light. I don't want to change. He is very high strong about that hypothesis. That's his whole life, right?
Hmm.
Every scientist has this obsession with, look, I may be obsessed with bifidobacteria. I could be wrong. As scientists, we tend to be obsessive in our hypothesis, and it's like a little baby, it's like a painting, it's like that creation, that vision. I think it's important to each stay in our lane of that
Hmm.
vision, because with that vision, that pathway eventually merges with another pathway and another pathway. Think about Zach Bush and his ion therapy. He sees something and he's focused on that and he's moving on that and he's showing the data and he's treating kids and he's seeing and he's gaining momentum from treating kids with autism. But here's the thing. What is that doing? What is that product doing to the microbiome? What is it doing to the microbiome that it helps certain kids and may not help others, right? It needs to be looked at. So we're actually working together to look at
Oh,
it,
good.
because,
Good.
I want to know, what does the ion do? Maybe there's a formula that it changes. Like I said, lactoferrin. Some, company came to me and said, well, we believe it changes the microbiome. Well, let's look at it, right? um, Jack Cruz talks about the light and the red light. and how the light changes the microbes. Well, let's look at it, right? So this is where one vision does not necessarily mean one path, but can merge into multiple paths of other scientists and bringing it to the table and saying, let's add this, let's add that, let's add that. I've done clinical trials for 3 decades, and I always was very good at being objective on the drugs that I would bring. Okay. If a drug was good, needed to come out because that was the drug at the time of the science, at the time of the technology. If a drug was bad and people were killing themselves from it, no, it doesn't go into market because people are killing themselves. And ultimately, you call the FDA and the FDA puts a black box warning on it. Okay. So if there's a black box warning on it, guess what? That's when you basically say, okay, I know the risk of this drug. I could kill myself with it, but the psoriasis is so bad that I want to kill myself from the psoriasis. So I'm willing to take a gamble on that drug, right? So I'm going to ignore the black box warning. That's called informed consent. That's
Right.
what patient does. That's what research should be. It should be, look, this is the best we have at this time to give you a quality of life and a quantity of life. Maybe in 10 years from now, there's going to be better, but right now, this is what we have. But here's the thing, if you stop the motion of the train, the direction, the research, the opening, and you criticize that scientist for simply asking a question, then you've destroyed science, you've destroyed research. And frankly, I personally think the people that are interfering with research should be arrested. That's it.
And I think again, it goes back to you should be able to ask a question. If you
100%.
can't ask a question, first of all, freedom of speech, but second of all, if you're doing scientific research on something and someone has a question, you should want to hear the question because maybe you're not thinking of that and maybe you haven't thought of it, and it doesn't mean you have to go with it or not go with it, but as scientists, you guys should be coming together to work together. And I like how you are working with Dr. Bush. And I think that's great because, he's done some research that you haven't done. And you've got a lot of experience in research that he hasn't done. And so coming together and bringing the brains together to then better human beings.
We all have a gift.
Yes, absolutely.
Something to have a vision. Ultimately, that's what it takes to make a better world, to reach Mars, to reach the moon. You need people
to heal people
together that have that different vision, that are different. Because guess what? If everybody's thinking the same, well, you're never going to innovate. If I was thinking, you know what, I'm just going to follow the path for COVID and I'm just going to follow the directions of Dr. Fauci, then I would have never discovered the microbiome, right? And ultimately, that adds something. And that brings on something to teach the people at the CDC and the FDA. Because guess what? Ultimately, my research opened the door to how do you survive a virus with a strong microbiome? We have to start looking at natural immunity. We have to start looking at what is in our bodies that allows us to heal. We have the ability. Think
absolutely
about platelet-rich plasma and what that's doing for inflammation. Our own platelets, our own stem cells can be directed to heal an inflammation. That's huge. We need to look at that. So because I'm pitching a biologic or because I'm invested in fecal material, I'm not going to look at stem cells? Of course not.
right.
I mean, anybody that's smart and even businessmen will know that you have to diversify your funds. You're not going to just invest in real estate. You're going to invest in pharma. You're going to invest in the farms. You have to diversify. But here's the thing. In science, even you have to diversify. You have to think of the stem cells, the T cells, the platelets, the biologics, the medications, the natural medications, the vitamins, the bovine, all of that works together to create health, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and our body, if given half the chance, can heal itself. I mean, it is made that way. It's a beautiful mechanical thing, but it's made to heal. And the proof in the pudding in that is that all of the destruction that we've done over the years, especially with sick people, like if they really looked at their lifestyle and what all the parts and pieces, the fact that they're still living really speaks to how amazing their body actually is to keep
How
them
amazing
alive through all of
resilience,
correct. So
resilience of humanity is
yeah, 100%. So again, when people say, it's not our bodies, it's all the other stuff, it's like, how could you discount your body? Like, that's so crazy. I want to talk a little bit about your book because I read it and I think again, what drove you to write it? And then what is your biggest takeaways that you would like people to get from the book?
well, I think, what drove me to write it was we're entering into a field of feces and capsules, and I think it was important for me to talk about the microbiome. I could have called it Let's Talk Microbiome, but I called it Let's Talk Shit because I wanted to be plain and transparent, and it's also my little sense of humor in a way. Um, the other thing is I wanted to write it because I wanted people to understand the microbiome in layman's terms. We tend to think of microbes and bacteria and antibiotics, but we really don't know what an antibiotic is, what a bacteria is, what a vaccine. I mean, think about the artist that's writing songs all day long. They have no idea what a virus is, what a
Right,
bacteria, what the difference between a bacteria and a virus is. Um, and also, how did antibiotics get created? What is the story behind it? Or who was behind it? So we've kind of like turned away from the old ways of doing science in a petri dish and looking
right.
at microbes grow and then what kills the microbe, what grows the microbe. And we've kind of gone into this world that's so complicated that people are lost a little bit and
Very
they
much so.
only hear certain things from the media and influencers. So I wanted a book that basically talked about what we know right now on the microbiome, where we're at, how did we come to realize the microbiome, also cautioning people not to start using stools randomly from people in your kitchen because you don't know what you're getting. You're playing with millions and trillions of microbes there. Some of them you have no idea, and you may be swapping one problem for a bigger problem.
Right.
So that's why I wrote it. I talk about bifidobacteria in like the third chapter or so,
Mhm.
and I talk about bifidobacteria at the beginning, and I wanted it to be. I wrote it before the pandemic, and I was in search of the bifidobacteria. So I wrote it in the book with that interest of really looking for bifidobacteria. And during the pandemic, when bifidobacteria took a shape of its own and started showing up in absence of bifidobacteria in Alzheimer's, absence of bifidobacteria in invasive cancer, in long haulers, in Lyme disease, Crohn's disease, it started to take a shape. And when I started with this book, it was very all over the place because if you know anything about me, I'm a hurricane in motion. And I'm very thankful and I'm very lucky that I have in my circle of people that organize me, from my right hand girl in my lab that organizes all my stools and my protocols, to my lab director that organizes, to my scientist that organizes all my papers, to my writer, my helper, Shelley Ellsworth, who like me has kind of this quirky sense of humor. And so I had a bunch of jokes in there, like the whole gas episode with
Yeah, so
her
funny.
husband. That was me. And then she has her own sense of humor in there. The ballerina, that was me. So it's so funny because she writes in there, she's the person that helped me get my shit together because I was putting on her so many papers. I'm like, you've got to include this paper in the book. You've got to include this paper, this article, this, and then she just like put it all together um, in a beautiful way. It was an important book to kind of like
Mhm.
organize my thoughts, organize what I wanted to say out of that. Having Dr. Barodi in it was really enormous for me because here's a man that every GI around the world, especially that do fecal transplants or C. diff, they know him. He's like Elvis to all of us. He's brought us to this path. And for me to have connected with him on autism and fecal transplant, and for him to say, well, Dr. Hazen, there's a lot more than C. diff to fecal transplant. You really need to start working on other conditions. And I said, well, I did have a condition of a patient with Alzheimer's. And he said to me, you need to write that paper. And I was not a writer. I'm not the girl that sits down on her desk. I'm the girl that's like, let's get 20 patients with diabetes, test their stools, look at what's going on in the microbiome. He'll be like, no, you need to write it. Impossible. Sit down, write it, do it. And so I wrote it, took me time to publish it. And I get very frustrated when things don't just work out
Work out.
I kind of like move on. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm done. And he would bring me back and say, no, you got to write this paper because this is a crucial paper for fecal transplant. Because that was the first time that we started looking at the gut brain axis. It was the first paper that basically said, wait, amyloids may not be the problem of Alzheimer's, or amyloids may be the problem in some people, but not in others. So at least they kind of gave a different vision
Mm-hmm.
to say, maybe we need to look at the gut. Maybe gut health is more important than we think. Maybe, yes, it could be a brain primary, it could be a connection between the brain and the gut, but it could also be the gut primary, and we cannot forget the gut. It was great working with him. When I said to him, and remember, this is a gentleman who's written hundreds of papers, and I said, Dr. Barotti, we're going to write the book, but we're going to call it Let's Talk Shit. Brilliant. I love it. Let's do it. So it was kind of funny to have this academician, go, let's talk shit and follow me in this. Because what we realized, and I said, because we stepped in, both of us, for COVID. We were the ones that started the protocol on hydroxy, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc, and ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc, and vitamin C and D. So when we started these two protocols with COVID, we realized there was a lot of corruption out there when we couldn't advertise. And here I come from the pharma world, having access with the FDA. He came from the innovator that had patents that he licensed to pharma. How many pharmaceutical companies? Just today, a company called me and said, I worked with Dr. Barotti on a product for C. diff, and he enrolled 106 patients. And that is so Dr. Barotti, right? So to have that genius of a man that is so respected, that innovated, and to literally during the pandemic, when we saw the troubles we had to bring early treatment to market, early cheap treatment to market.
There you go. You just said it. Cheap treatment. Cheap.
Yes, cheap treatment for everyone. When we thought of doing that, and all of a sudden it was stopped. There were so many narratives. That's when I said, you know what? Let's call it Let's Talk Shit. And
Yeah.
this way, every time it was the perfect title, because every time somebody would harass me on social media, on Twitter, I would say, well, if you're gonna talk shit about me, read me a book.
Right.
And then you would put my picture of me with the book, and it would stop that because they didn't want to sell my book.
Right.
But they sell my book.
That's awesome.
So, I could be full of it, I could know it, but you know what? At the end of the day, let's talk about it, right? And
Yeah.
it kind of became patchy because it's like Scaroons, who owns the lab that's basically putting these capsules of poop. I saw him in the meeting, and he would see me, and I love his work because he's really a brilliant scientist, and he's very humble. He's one that said to me from the beginning, he'd say, I don't know if there's anything in that poop with autism, but I'm willing to look at it.
Yeah.
That's the best scientist you could have.
100%. Why would you not want to look at it?
Yeah, because this is his world of fabricating these capsules. And he said to me, he would literally say to me, let's look at it, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's all that. And so to me, that level of humility is what
Hmm.
really attracted me to his work and to trust his lab and using his lab, using his products. But more than that, it was so funny because like at one of the meetings we met and he said, let's yeah, I respect the man, I respect his work, I respect fecal materials and capsule, but I just still think that we need to proceed with caution. The moment that I get fecal material and capsules from China, Korea, Japan in a clinical trial, one has to ask, you know, is this the world we're heading in? And should we have a capsule of poop from Japan to Americans? Is that messing up the microbiome of Japan or America, right? And
Right.
we have American poop being transported to Japan. Is that messing up the microbiome of Japan from America, right? Because the microbiome of Japanese
It's
in Japan
different.
versus the microbiome of Japanese in America, completely different. I think we need to respect the boundaries
Yeah.
of the locations. I think this is why, in a way, the French don't eat tomatoes after, if it's not in season, they don't bring it in because they don't want to bring in the microbes from the regions, right? I think we need to keep the microbes of the regions in the regions because then we're creating a whole big problem for humanity. And we're also globalizing humanity.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that for a variety of reasons. All of those, plus, if you're transferring from country to country, they're just different worlds, and the microbes that we do carry here in our soil, in our bodies, just everywhere is just very different. So
Very
I think
different.
one of the questions is like when you do a fecal transplant, obviously it's clean and you've tested it and all of that stuff, but
As clean as can be.
correct. But let's say you got a transplant
Yes.
and your microbiome changes, how does that change somebody as a person? Does it change somebody as a person? Like that's just a thought.
Obviously fecal transplant is for C. diff right now, right?
Right.
So there is, Colleen Kelly has a registry where she's looking at all that. I think she's got like hundreds of thousands of samples in there of people that basically, in the registry to analyze all that. Um, I think ultimately we are seeing some things. I don't think we're definitely, there's data out there that basically shows that if, you look at the MIT students as donors and the recipients tend to have more anxiety. So is it because the donors themselves have we published recently a signature microbiome for anxiety. So is it because they have that signature microbiome of anxiety and therefore transferring those microbes, which are linked with anxiety, and therefore the recipient is having anxiety? Maybe, possibly. My own study, my own anecdotal cases, I've seen patient depression, suicidal, post-fecal transplant being non-suicidal and happy.
Interesting.
Um, did I correct the microbiome dysbiosis and therefore that person is much happier? That probably plays more role than changing the microbes themselves.
True.
This is why we need to proceed
Keep going. Yeah,
carefully
absolutely.
and analyze carefully and follow these people,
Yep.
and maybe have a psychiatric eval even to look to see, are we changing the microbiome and are we changing the mental health for better or for worse?
Yeah. And that's part of science. That's part of learning. It's
I
how
think
things get discovered. And you have to be humble enough to say, oh, this is not good. We're going to stop doing this, or this is great. So again, it's just when you're in science and when you're doing these experiments and when you're working on things, we have to expect that there's going to be some dips and things that happen because that's part of science. I know a lot of people that are listening today are probably hearing this for the very first time. And so they're probably a little bit like, whoa, what is all this? So a couple of things, in your book, all disease, like you said earlier in the show, starts in the microbiome. Like when we
yeah,
have a dysbiosis going on, when we have gut imbalances, that is ultimately where disease starts. But our gut and our brain are very connected. There's
yes,
that superhighway pathway. And so
yeah.
a lot of our neurotransmitters are made in our gut. So there's so much that's going on in our gut that we don't even know on a daily basis. What would be a few things that if a mom's listening today and they're like, we got to get our microbiomes in check, what are a couple of just things at home that people can start thinking about?
I think decreasing stress in the home, creating a clean environment, not clean of microbes, but clean, stress-free environment. Um, Having real foods, that's very important. Making sure if you're eating meat, that they're not getting pumped with a ton of antibiotics. Which, by the way, that was stopped by the FDA years back, because they noticed there was an increase in C. diff, and of course that came from the beef we were eating. So, when you see kids with C. diff and they never took antibiotics, you have to ask, was it the hamburger they ate, the night before? So I think that's the main thing, making sure your kids have levels of vitamin D that is adequate. We tend to be indoors a lot. We need to be exposed to the sun. And if we're not exposed, then supplement with vitamins. Making sure your products, where they're coming from,
Yes.
is your vitamin made in America, where there's supervision and a GMP facility, or is it made in China, where nobody's really checking over there the quality and how they're being made? And again, possibly contaminated with microbes of China that are coming to America, right? So I think where the products are made is important. Um,
I agree with that.
um, the quality of the products, the quality of the foods, the quality of the farmers, the farming. Where are you getting your milk? Is your milk, from a goat that was,
Right.
infected by mammary gland, or is the farmer in tune with looking at the mammary glands, making sure that there's no infection there, and making sure that if a cow has diarrhea, that cow is not processed, making sure that if there's parasites that we know, that they're processed, they're taken care of. I think that's one. Two, I'm not a big fan of sushi. And if you're going to eat sushi, just make sure you have like a lot of lemon with it and ginger and soy sauce, because there are parasites in the raw fish and those parasites are going everywhere. Um, good food, good fermented food. What else? Testing, I wouldn't push testing per se. If your kid is healthy, stick to letting him be. Remember when we were kids, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my mom didn't do any stool testing of me. She just let me play outdoors. She let me drink water from a hose if I wanted to. She let me eat whatever I wanted to. So let your kid thrive naturally without the overall stressors that we put on our kids, like, oh, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat that. You know, let your kids be, because they're going to develop their own resilience on their
Mhm.
own, eating the crap that they're going to eat. If they're healthy, let them be. Okay. The misconception that we make as parents and the mistakes we make as parents is we hover over these kids too much. We sterilize their environment. We sterilize those bottles they're eating, they're drinking of. Think about your kid when they're babies. You're sterilizing those nipples. You're sterilizing the bottle. I mean, it's like a hospital. Let them eat. Let them touch the floor. Let them, develop, be immune to microbes. Um, I'm not a pusher of probiotics in kids. Big mistake. Let them grow their own probiotics in their
Right.
gut, not giving them microbes that could get killed in the stomach or open in the small bowel and cause SIBO down the road. I'm not a fan of digestive enzymes if they don't have problems, because now you're going to open that can of worm. You're not letting your body do what it's supposed to do, which is secrete its own enzymes. So don't replace what the body is supposed to be doing. Let your body, it's like
Do it.
these kids that are taking laxatives because they feel they're constipated. Well, maybe that's your norm. Maybe that's your microbiome telling you, I don't want to release these microbes just yet, right? Follow a path. Don't think that because a person is having a bowel movement every twice a day, that should be your normal. Your normal may be completely different. If you're healthy, you're of sound mind, sound body, do exactly what you've been doing and live a long life. Make your own choices on what you take. Don't get influenced by others. Don't believe necessarily what is out there, because that's what's going to cause you more problems. So many influencers are selling so many things. Do your research. That's the best thing I
That's,
could say.
yeah,
Trust someone that basically is doing the research. Trust someone that has a lab. That is one of the things, the two twins that I talked about that improved with autism. The mom came and saw the lab that we have here. It's a multi-million-dollar lab with all the bells and whistles to analyze the microbiome. She took confidence in that because she
right.
saw how meticulous I am at doing my research to find the perfect donor, to look for the microbes. And by trusting that, by seeing that, she trusted me. And then, of course, now her kids are better. When you find that doctor, it doesn't, and it's not necessarily me, make sure they're doing the right thing, make sure they're humble, make sure they tell you it's research, make sure you have an informed consent that advises you that whatever they're doing is research. Because on the most part, anything with autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, there are no treatment right now. Anything is research.
Experimental. Yeah.
If somebody sells you a product and says, you know, I think this vitamin is great for Parkinson's. Well, it's still research. This fiber, this probiotic, it's still research. And look at the risk versus benefits. If it's a product that's safe, and tolerated, part of the reason I embarked with hydroxychloroquine Z-Pak for dying patients with COVID is because hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak has been around for years. Ivermectin, doxycycline. I mean, we gave kids with scabies and lice ivermectin, and now we can't give them to dying patients. Come on. We gave doxycycline to kids with acne for years, and now we can't give it for dying patients. I mean, come on.
Right.
So be critical, stand up for the people that are doing the right thing.
Go
Because
with your gut. I'm always a firm
go with
believer,
your
like when,
gut feeling.
yeah, when you sit down with a
Your gut feeling.
pediatrician, when you sit down with a doctor, they may work for you for a year, they may work for you for 6 months, but if you get that gut feeling that says otherwise, we are not married to anybody. We get up,
No.
we find somebody different.
And listen, there's different personalities in medicine, and
100.
I can't work with everybody. And I
Sure.
tell people right off, there's some people that this is why the first interview with me is really to get to know my patient. Can I work with this person? If my patient is high strong, type A, is not going to listen to me, is going to give me, and that doesn't mean that I should be listened to, but if they're not going to listen to what I've seen work, then I'm not the person for them. They need to
Correct.
find someone else that they can relate to, that can listen to them. It's so important, that patient doctor relationship, because ultimately I'm there to be your coach, but because I see something and I'm trying to reproduce that something. But if you have a certain mindset that's going to destroy what I've seen so far, that's not going to work, right? Because your brain is telling your gut it's not going to work. Right away, you're
You've
directing
already, yeah,
your gut. So, there's so much to that too. The manifestation, the manifesting, manifesting healing, manifesting disease, manifesting problem. There's so much on that. We have the ability to design ourselves to heal, but at the same time, we have the ability to design ourselves to create disease. So we
100%.
really have to start thinking like something's upsetting me. I can't deal with that. And the reason for me, the first meeting with a patient is important because I don't want to kill my microbiome helping someone else.
That's
What
right.
am I going
Because
to
you have
do?
to, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I literally tell people this. I go, listen, I don't want to kill my microbiome. You do you, and let's just, call it quits. Because at the end of the day, it is a patient doctor relationship. It is the art of medicine. It is a painting that needs to be painted. And I may not be the person to paint your painting. Someone
Yeah.
else
And
will
that's
do it.
okay. But I think being upfront, and also you have to respect your health and wellness.
You can't, it's like being on that plane and you have to put your oxygen mask first before putting it on the baby, right?
Yep.
You can't treat someone else if you yourself are tired. I try to balance myself constantly because I realize, like right now we're in May and I'm already itching to go in my garden So I know I need space and I need time to be gardening, to find my zone, to
Yeah.
grow my vegetables, to be in the dirt, to regrow my microbiome, because otherwise, work, and helping others, you burn out really fast. It's not good.
Right. And then you end up sick. And
And
again,
then you end up with good, no
yeah, I'm
good.
glad you brought up stress because I think, stress just goes under the radar so much. Like we just have a stressful life. No, you're creating a stressful life. You're participating in a stressful life. You can put boundaries up for yourself that says, I can't do this because this will interfere with my health and wellness. Again, we've just not been taught that to think like that. And we haven't been taught that it's okay to say things like that, right? And feel things like
Absolutely.
that. And I
Absolutely.
do feel like the conversation has gotten started again, just with holistic integration and just things that people are talking about. But stress affects your microbiome big time. And it also affects your health and wellness because that's where,
Yes.
it's all in the gut. So everything is interconnected. I know we have specialized doctors for certain things, but at the end of the day, when these doctors are not communicating with one another, it's a huge disservice because you're going to the heart doctor for this and the liver doctor for this, but they don't know what each other are doing. And then,
There's no time in the system to allow
right,
that. There is no time
100%.
for all that. There
Yep.
needs to be an hour as a CPT code that allows for doctors to meet on a patient
Yeah.
where the insurances are paying for that. So they're
Yep.
not really, the system is created to disadvantage the doctor and the patient and to
Absolutely.
divide the patient and the doctor, not to bring them together.
Right.
But
Right.
I have to kind of go because I have
Yep.
a
All right.
one.
So just let's wrap up really quick. Tell me two things that you do to keep yourself healthy and well in the stressful work that you do and the exciting work you do. Because again, you have to come first.
So gardening is very important to
Love
me.
that.
I'm a huge gardener. I like to be one with nature, so I like to go hike. I like to see the world. I like to expose myself to different areas of the world and meet people, not as a tourist, but I'll go to different conferences where I'm going to meet the physicians in those areas. And I like to kind of live like the people of the area to kind of expose to the microbes. Um, this microbiome exploration is my passion.
Love
Uh,
that.
I'm extremely passionate about it. So I find humor in it. Like here I am in Zimbabwe on a safari, and I'll analyze the microbiome of the zebras and the cow and the elephants and the giraffes and the monkeys. So to me, that's kind of funny in a way because I was not that girl. I was extremely sterile as a kid, would not touch poop for $1,000,000. So for me to like go completely, where I'm spending my money analyzing poop, it is kind of funny. It keeps me in a humorous state of mind. I like to find humor where there isn't humor. I like to find light where there's darkness. I like to find hope, and I believe in God. I'm a huge believer of God. I had faith the whole pandemic, and um, it's faith that you're here on a path, that you're here to understand something, and we're all here on this planet to understand something. Whether there is something after this life, and we come back or not. I mean, certainly the process of dying, and I've said it before, is microbes. Taking over your body and putting you back into the ground. These microbes are still alive. It really is to our best interest to understand them before they take over our bodies. So this is kind of my path, right? To understand, where do these microbes go after we die? Um, so how do I, balance myself, is really that discovery,
Yeah.
that
Curiosity.
in being Indiana Jones and in the temple of poop, or Lara Croft in the temple of poop. So it's really finding that priceless microbe, looking for that priceless microbe, looking for that resilient microbe, looking for that old microbe, that archaea that might change a life, looking for what certain products are doing for. So to me, that's very exciting. Every day is Christmas. I tried very hard to make fun out of the roadblocks,
Hmm.
because if you make fun of it, it's easier to cross. Otherwise, you get blocked and you're like, oh my God, and you get consumed by the hatred.
Yes.
And I try not to have hate. I try to really look at it as those people are brainwashed with money. They're obsessed with money. Probably they're losing microbes and they really need good microbes. Okay.
Right.
So, I look at my enemy not as my enemy, but as someone that needs microbes from me.
No, I mean, that's such a good way to look at it. I think that's great. That's actually just a life analogy for everybody. It's not just in what
Yeah.
you do, but that's in all things.
Look at them as they need something from you
Yeah.
and attack your enemy with love.
Yes.
Bring love, bring healing. Say, maybe that person needs something, that
Usually
I
they
can
do.
help them with. So
Yeah.
when you go that route and somebody hates you because of your color, skin, or because of the way you talk, don't go at it with hate, by attacking. Go at it with humor and go at it with, how do I bring healing? How do I bring peace between us? Because the problem is ultimately, when somebody has a business venture in their mind, they will attack you because you're going against their business venture.
Mhm.
So you have to kind of take it to say, okay, I'm not going to kill myself because he's got a certain path that I'm interfering with. But how do I bring that path to help him, help me, and help me help him? That's what it's all about. I think we have to bring back humanity. We have to
Yeah.
realize we're humans, we're human beings. I really try to approach everyone on one, even the people that are so angry, etc. I try to bring them to have a discussion because I think that's very healthy to have discussions. Communication is very important.
Absolutely.
So communication is important. Hiking, gardening,
Love it.
in the planet, meeting different people, hugging, loving life, being,
Making a difference for other people, really.
yeah, and being so privileged that we're alive today. Every day we should be looking at it as like we're breathing.
Yeah.
So what if I don't have that Mercedes or that Tesla? So what? I'm breathing. I don't have cancer. I
Yeah.
don't have to wake up every morning thinking that I have to do some harsh treatment for myself, So I think that's important. That's what keeps me in balance. That's also made me realize that no matter what life challenges you get, it's important to take those challenges and turn them around and say, what is the best part of that scenario?
Mhm.
Well, the best part of that scenario is I'm spending more time with my kids. The best part of that scenario is I'm spending more time with my family. Best part of that scenario is I'm hiking more. I'm doing more. So everything that happens to you in your life, find
It
the
happens for you, not to you, but like
for you
for.
to learn something
Yes.
and find the positive,
Yep.
find the lesson. So that's my healing,
I love
that's
it. Thank you for sharing all of your stuff, but for really sharing your wisdom and all of the work that you've done. I mean, thank you so much because for people like us who have no clue, the extent in which you know all this stuff, I appreciate people like you and the fact that you don't back down and that you keep doing your work and you are here for a reason and your purpose is going to shine. I think it's already starting to shine. I know people are listening and hearing and reading your book. And I think all of that's super important. So thank you for all that you do. And thanks for sharing with my audience. And I know today they're going to walk away with tons of 1% shifts that they can add to their knowledge, to their life, and, to make a healthier version of themselves. So thank you guys. And I will see y'all next week. And thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
That episode had so many great takeaways. I hope you feel inspired and more empowered to make small 1% shifts on your wellness journey this week. I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you want to leave a review, share your thoughts, and let me know how you're going to be implementing these 1% shifts into your life. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with another mama who could use a little wellness love. Want to stay connected? Join me on Instagram and Facebook at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Check out my website at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com for more resources and grab yourself some freebies while you're there. Until next time, I hope you find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to come your way. See y'all next week. Love to y'all.